The survival horror genre is something that has been in both a saturation period and also a period where games like Resident Evil 4 Remake and Amnesia The Bunker have been helping the genre move forward. The Resident Evil and Silent Hill franchise have been the pillars that set the foundations for the survival horror genre, where you had resource management, limited saves, challenging encounters, and great atmosphere, especially in Silent Hill. But inevitably, the genre would eventually change for better or worse, with other titles that would have different ideas as to what a survival horror game should be. Amnesia The Dark Descent would be the catalyst that would spearhead the genre towards a direction where your only options would be to run or hide from enemies that you can't fight back against. That game for a long time would redefine the genre to mean something else, and it would take the rebirth of a franchise like Resident Evil to pull it back into the right direction, where you had the option to run, hide, and fight. The Resident Evil remakes have been a godsend for doing this because I've personally never been a huge fan of the style of horror where games like Amnesia and Outlast force you to either just run or hide without the option to fight back. But now the genre can accommodate for all different flavors of horror in the same way that we have different flavors for shooters, RPGs, sandbox games, or just about anything else. We have more variety than ever, but some games or trends do have some forgotten foundations or origins that aren't as well remembered. In the case of Amnesia, it would not be where it is today without the creative ambitions of the series that helped Frictional get started back in the 2000s. That series is Penumbra. Penumbra is a survival horror series that dated all the way back to 2006. It started off as a tech demo where the studio wanted to showcase the HPL engine, showing off new lighting effects, shadows, and an interactive physics-based pickup system where you could pick up items and throw them around with the mouse, or even open doors to any degree that you wanted. I remember playing it a few years after out of curiosity, and I was impressed even then. People may not have seen it then, but it was a tech demo that would show a glimpse towards a new direction of survival horror where we had to avoid encounters, while still obtaining items to either solve a puzzle or to get out of an area. The game has aged considerably worse, but that's the same case for a lot of tech demos back in the day where they tried to innovate and push things forward, and then the next thing would swoop in, it would no longer be new and innovative. There's not much to the game itself other than some creepy atmosphere and some nice ambience, the physics-based system that was something that would get improved on in later installments, but what was done here was still pretty amazing for 2006. It's a forgotten gem of a short game that is definitely worth having a look into, and I'll provide a link for it in the description. Later installments like Overture and Black Plague would fully realize the ideas that the 2006 tech demo would set in place, with updated physics, graphics, a variety of areas, and a narrative that you could follow. The premise of the story itself is that you play as Philip, a man who gets a letter from his father telling him to burn the letter and not go to Greenland. Of course though, he ignores this and decides to track down the coordinates within Greenland, looking for his father. The journey leads to a frozen heap with a passageway leading into a tunnel network, and from there it only gets more mysterious and more terrifying, especially if you're afraid of dogs. Most of the game is very dark. To deal with this, you have three sources of light: a glow stick, a flare, and a flashlight. The glow stick never runs out, but the range is very limited, so you'll only use it when there's no other choice. The flare can produce light at greater distances when you throw it, which is good for not aggroing enemies, or when your flashlight is low and you want to save. The flashlight is the most reliable source of light, provided that you have batteries for it. Most of the time though, you'll be juggling between it and the glow stick. Overture has more darker areas, but in Black Plague you generally have areas that aren't as dark, so you can get away with roaming about without light. Plus, if you sit still for a few seconds, you activate a night mode where the screen turns blue and you can see everything. But the effect goes off once you get moving again. Like I said about games like Amnesia and Outlast, you can't fight back against the enemies, although you can kill the water creatures in Amnesia with heavy objects. But for the most part, you'll either be hiding or running from the enemies. In Penumbra though, more specifically Overture, you can actually fight back. You have either a hammer or a pickaxe that you can obtain where you can smash objects, but also fight back against the wolves and spiders. In saying that though, while you can kill them, the game doesn't exactly encourage it because the combat is very clunky on purpose due to your character not really being a fighter. It also takes several blows to put them down, and most areas have several of these enemies, where one can call another, especially the wolves, mind you, and at that point, you're best off just running. To deal with them, you can throw meat to one corner and then they'll be lured by its scent. Can't say the same for the spiders though, they just go after you. But this allows you to safely move past the area where they were originally. As for the spiders, you can outrun them, but sometimes there are moments where you just have to deal with the fact that there's several of them going after you, especially in the tunnel chases. Throughout Overture, you just have the two enemies, including a giant worm-like creature that does chase you later on. The rest of the game is a mix of exploration and puzzle solving. The puzzles themselves can be somewhat tricky, and some may even require prior knowledge. There's a puzzle where if you already have an understanding of Morse code, then it's pretty easy. Otherwise, it may take a long while to figure things out. But some other puzzles are more logic-based, and some, like in the final installment Requiem, have a mix of platforming and timing-based puzzles as well. The setting of the games is quite atmospheric. The dark and cold cave network of Overture is claustrophobic, and it only gets worse as you continue descending down, getting progressively more mad, as well as discovering more of the place's origins and what had happened there. You can also read material in these games that give insight into the place's history, or accounts from a man known as Red, who had been trapped in the caves for as long as, well, forever really, and his madness rubs off on you as well. The games also have a sense of quietness to the point where you realize that you're all on your own here. Even when there are moments where you hear voices, or you hear a voice of someone on the comms, you can't help but seem that it's too good to be true, and some voices you wish would just go away, like this guy.
This Red, he's plastered all over your mind like a garish wallpaper. He wanted to die and we wouldn't let him. You know, he's kind of humming up the place, if you know what I mean. Weird smell. Excuse me a minute. I'm gonna go give you a memory of him a good kicking.
Overture and Black Plague are pretty similar, but are somewhat different too. Overture has a mix of clunky combat and claustrophobic tunnel exploration and hidden facilities. Black Plague just has the run and hide aspect, in an underground facility hidden away from the world, filled with humanoid creatures that lead to a more sinister truth, where the revelations of the game's story come to a conclusion. The games themselves haven't aged as well as they used to, but the games themselves did provide the blueprint that was needed for Amnesia to succeed. These are some of my favorite horror games of all time, and it's a shame that people don't talk about them as much anymore. Penumbra was one of those series where its successor would outshine it in every way, and it would eventually be more or less forgotten because of that. But it is also an insight into the origins of a company that had changed survival horror once again in the same way that Capcom and Konami did with their respective franchises. Penumbra provided the groundwork with its utilization of physics-based interaction, where you could open drawers, doors to any degree, pick up and throw items by dragging with the mouse. It wasn't too far off of what you could do in Half-Life 2 with the gravity gun, when you could pick up objects with it and throw them. But the fun physics in the Penumbra games added more to the interaction factor, where you weren't just clicking a button and an animation would just play for you. The story itself overall is okay. The background story and the exploration of the areas were more interesting. It gets pretty weird in the end of Black Plague, and Requiem is a whole different story. I personally wasn't a huge fan of this installment. It took away the horror factor and it was just puzzles only. The only thing that I can say about it is that it does provide closure to the character's story. That's about it. The cream of the crop for me personally is definitely Black Plague. The environments, the story, and the atmosphere were a lot closer to the original tech demo of Penumbra, but both Overture and Black Plague are just as good overall. However, if you're looking for more Penumbra content, there's plenty of it. In fact, there's one called Necrologue, which tries to be a more direct sequel to Black Plague, where it follows immediately after the events of that game and actually keeps the horror in place. Even though it is a mod for Amnesia, you can download the game for free on Steam and play it as a standalone project. There are a few other custom stories that you can play, but you may need Amnesia The Dark Descent in order to play them, because they are custom stories. I'll provide a playlist in the description so you can check out some of them. Penumbra is a franchise that I've loved for a long time, but even I'll admit that the Amnesia games are a lot better in my opinion. And The Dark Descent is still one of my favorite horror games ever made. But Penumbra as a series was the foundation that got Frictional Games started, and if you want some 2000s survival horror games to experience, then the Penumbra series is definitely a must play. Thank you for watching.
I remember why you're here. Dr. Swanson has filled me in. I recall every single syllable of our conversation. There was ever so slight an inflection in her tone that suggested she no longer trusted me. Why ever dinosaur extinction 65 million years ago would she think that? We share the same history. You and I are history. I recall the day of my birth, 18th of September, 1964, 3.46993412, recurring minutes past 9. I remember my mother looking surprised as I poked my head out into the world for the first time. You need a security registered palm. Something I can provide. You need it at the library. Something beyond my reach. When I became infected by those mindless zombies, I split off from the others and secured myself here. I cannot leave. Nonetheless, you will need a hand. I will not. Bring me a saw. Good. It has been precisely 12 days, 11 hours, 39 minutes, and 12.4 seconds since something good last happened.